Welcome back, everyone. I hope you can hear me. We are now moving on to our next workshop. We'll be looking at how cultural places can support their transition by developing a policy targeted towards young people. We'll be looking at the different programs and how they can be a part of citizenship education and awareness raising for sustainable development, working together with schools. To do so, today we are welcoming Jessica Fritz, who is coming from Berlin. She is the art director and the audience director for the Jugend Museum in Berlin, depending on the Tempelhof Museum. From Copenhagen, we have Ditte MEYER, who is the art educator in charge of mediation. We have Selma TOPRAK-DENIS, the director of the Centre Pompidou, and Michel, director of the Cité de la Mer. We also have Alexia, JACQUES-CASANOVA, founder of ARTIZEST, moderating this roundtable. Very quickly, just one word of housekeeping. Jessica Fritz will be speaking German, and there will therefore be a consecutive interpreting from German into English. For everyone else, it will be interpreted into French directly. Alexia, you have the floor. Thank you, and welcome to all of you for being with us for this roundtable. We'll be discussing how a policy that is innovative and targeting to young people can contribute to the transition of museums. We have 4 professionals of European contemporary museums focusing on these issues. We'll be speaking mostly English, German, and French today, so make sure that you have your headsets ready, and I would like to thank the interpreters that make it possible to share in different languages. Selma TOPRAK-DENIS is the director in charge of the audiences and in charge of cultural mediation at the Centre Pompidou. She's been working there since 2021. She is in charge of the art studio and the gallery for young people, children and teenagers, and she is in charge of artistic mediation and partnerships, both regional and international, on art mediation. She used to be the Secretary General of TRAM, a network for contemporary art in Paris and the Greater Paris area. She also directed the Festival Normandie Impressionniste, where she was in charge of the pedagogic projects for this project. She has a lot of international experience as well. She has been working as a diplomatic attaché for cultural affairs as well. If some of you cannot see us today, she is a brown-haired woman. She wears glasses and a gray blouse. Sitting to the right of Selma, we have Ditte MEYER, who holds a master's degree in the history of the arts, and she works at the Copenhagen Contemporary Art Museum. She's in charge of the CC studio there. Copenhagen Contemporary is very attached to the idea that museums have the responsibility towards the public and to make it accessible to a broader audience. CC Studio brings together different audiences together, among other things, with the Art Democrat modules. Ditte is a blonde-haired woman. She's wearing a dot and is wearing a black blouse and trousers. We then have Michel, who has been working on renovating the Industry Museum in Saint-Étienne. She has been a consultant for 4 years and then created the museum in Meaux on the First World War. Then she joined the Museopark Alexia in the Burgundy region. And starting in 2022, he now is the director of the Cité de la Mer. He's wearing a black duffel, a sleeveless duffel, and he's got close-cropped hair. Then we have Jessica Fritz, the director of the Youth Museum in Berlin, with participatory exhibits that are focused and targeted at young people. She recently organized a collective exhibit with Chilean and German artists on human rights in Santiago. She studied the history of the arts at the Free University of Berlin. She participated in many different projects on human rights, feminism, diversity, migration, and climate change, among other things. I think that I introduced everyone. So that was it for the tour de table. Now, just a few words of introduction. We don't have a lot of time. I know that sometimes the titles that we give to our workshops can be a bit frustrating because they have to be short. So what do we mean when we call this workshop How to Put Young People into Action? It can be quite mysterious because we use this vocabulary that almost implies coercion towards the audiences that we try to serve as cultural institutions. Today, I hope that we will not be talking about coercion and coercing young people into coming to the museums, but instead how we can support young people and take them along on our journey to empower young people. Before I start giving the floor to our speakers, we need to admit that there is no such thing as young people as a single category, in the same way that we don't have adult audiences as an homogenic category. So I think it would be a mistake to just think that young people are all alike. So it does not always make sense to discuss young people generally, especially when you take into account something that is especially true in the cultural sector, namely that all of us are determined by our social determinants more than by our age. So we'll be talking about young people, meaning anyone between the age of 0 to 25 years old. So that's a lot of very different people. And again, talking about such a broad group as an homogenic group would be a mistake. All right, cutting now to my first question, turning to Selma, I would like to talk about how the perception of educational programs evolved. In art museums, for a very long time, the tradition of mediation was top-down and very focused on the work of art itself. So the idea was always to have an audience discover a specific piece of art. I would like to know whether there has been a change there, especially at the Pompidou Museum, where you are not focusing specifically on the work of art itself, but rather on young people and how to empower them and develop their skills. Tell us more about how the Pompidou Museum approaches the issue. Thank you very much, Alexia, for this introduction. I think that my approach is going to be somewhat different because mediation, from the get-go, and even before the center opened in the 70s, mediation there was the brainchild of Daniel Giraudy. And he really designed this mediation for young people with the idea that it has to be a mediation that went through active participation of young people, and also through artistic participation and practices. So from the very beginning, we had children's workshop where we invited artists. We still do it today, actually. And the team who was recruited to cover that was a team that was really active in the in this field, and that for young people, discovering a work of art always had to go through discovering the gestures that you use to make this piece. So this idea of mediation through active participation of children, this is something that we still have today. So of course we also work on the relationship with the work of art in many different ways, through the artistic gesture, with workshops, but also through more typical or more classical mediation as well. The person who is looking at the work of art in our approach has to be able to use their own systems of cultural references. And this is how we support them into developing their cultural skills and their ways to look at the art. But indeed, we now have a more relationship-centric mediation for our different audiences. To do so, we have developed different spaces, like Studio 13, for example, that opened recently for teenagers, and today looks at young audiences, from teenagers to young adults in particular. In this space, we invite artists who develop their own workshops for artistic practices. It's also a place of interdisciplinary art and societal issues. So the team who is in charge of the programming there, Junior Barna, Alexandra Fortul, etc., invite artists to work around different issues. For example, the end of the world, the climate issue, the environment in general. Recently, there was a work on love, and the next one will be rituals. So we have an active mediation on those topics, and always with an interdisciplinary angle. Just to give a few examples. And one of those projects was the project of our cultural creation department, which is in charge of the living arts. And in September, they created something surrounding the environmental question. The mediation service supported them in developing an amateur practice workshop, working with Esther Duflo, among others, and we invited the audience to take ownership of an artistic gesture, to imagine an utopia, and to translate that into a visual piece of art. So we started everything by what if. We worked with children and parents, because we also always like to have an intergenerational angle to our work. So that's what we did for these young people there. That's an example of active mediation through action. Another example, a project that we've been carrying out for quite some time now with a group of volunteers, young adults, usually between 18 and 23 years of age, but there's no upper limit, actually. And these young people, many of them are students, some of them are already working, some of them are not in employment or education, and most of them come from milieux that are not usually in touch with the world of art. We are working with a peer network to try and attract them. And it's a kind of residency, if you will. They have a privileged access to the Pompidou Center for a whole year. They have the same badge as everyone who works at the center. So they have access to everything, every resource that we have at the center. It's really a kind of residency for them. We also developed the Escale project with a group of young people based in the banlieue of Évry-Courcouronnes. These young people can discover the institution in a way that is quite typical for us, namely through workshops. There's a choreographer, for example. There's the presentation of the 13 studio, etc. So always through active mediation. And these young people also meet with professionals, a conservator, for example, the curators, the different people work at the Pompidou Center. And we work with those young people, and then they organize their own festival in Évry, using or not, whichever they choose, the resources that are put at their disposal by the Pompidou Center. And since we're talking about skills, we also work with a local mission on professional insertion. And we work with the National Education Ministry on the spoken word and speaking skills. We work with the different categories of age. I see that Émilie Bonnet is here today. She is in charge of the artistic education in the service. And Émilie and her team work with groups of pupils or older students sometimes. And we have those pupils, a speaker who brings their own knowledge to the table, and we have an outside speaker. It can be sometimes from the living arts world. It can be a comedian, for example. And they support young people in discovering those works of art by bringing their own contribution. So they're not there as a keynote speaker, if you will. It's not a conference. It's about bringing their own experience to help these young people develop different angles of view. And it means that you are really bringing different experiences to the table for the same work. Thank you. Thank you very much. Did you, either of you, want to react to those projects that we've just heard about, especially about the development of young people's skills? No? All right. So you talked about your partnerships with the National Education Ministry in particular. And my next question will be for Michel. In your institution, you work directly on issues that are very dear to the heart of many young people, namely the environment issue. And you want to make culture and research accessible to young people, and very concretely, you want to also create vocations by making science visible and understandable for young people in its relation with the sea, since you are at a maritime museum. So how can you help young people imagine what they can do after that, sorry? And I think that you try to display how science can help save the whales and clean up the oceans, but what happens afterwards? How do you work to support the work that is carried out in schools, for example? Thank you very much. The Cité de la Mer is based in Cherbourg, so in the Normandy region. And this is a place where you can visit the first nuclear submarine that was ever made in France. There is also an exhibit on the Titanic, because that's the only stop that the Titanic did in Europe. And there's an exhibit on the maritime war of the 1930s as well. So you have a lot of things on man-made machines, but also on biodiversity. All of that is part of what we do at the Cité de la Mer. In 2019, there was a first forum that was organized for young people. There, over the course of 2 days, we brought together scientists and young children, about 2,000 pupils from the primary schools and middle schools. We had a lot of great feedback from teachers, and we thought that this was something that we needed to develop. And of course, we did not know what 2020 and 2021 had in store for us, but we developed the ocean generation tools. 2022 will be the first year, has been the first year that we've been able to have a full year and organize everything that we had already planned for the previous years. We had 3 sessions in March, May, and October. We have specific topics. For example, the Antarctic poles. This year we'll be looking at the abysses. In October last year, we hosted the Tara Foundation, the Ocean Foundation, with, the scientific ship that roams the sea to gather and collect evidence, scientific evidence. So teachers can sign up their classes to participate in a round table where scientists come and talk to these young students about their experience. They explain what they do, what the point of it is. It's very concrete for young people. And that was very important for us, to make things very real and tangible for young people, to make them understand how science is created. So we were hoping to give them a taste for science, so that they would consider going into science later, so that they would understand that you can be a scientist diver, for example, these kind of things. We wanted to make that clear for those young people there. And we target about 3,000 to 3,500 young people per session, so that's about 10,000 people per year since we have 3 sessions. It does not mean, of course, that we'll have 10,000 people convinced to go into science and becoming scientists. Of course not. But the conviction that we have is that we can still initiate some vocations, and also that we can showcase science. We make science palatable to a broader audience. And at the same time, we raise awareness among those young people as to those different topics. Since we are the Cité de la Mer, of course, we need to look at safeguarding oceans and saving the oceans, basically. And raising awareness of that among young people is part of what we do. Of course, as museum professionals, we know that it can be a great way to create vocations among young people. If you have a partnership with a school, you'll be able to talk to many young people, and once they come back from their discovery, once they've learned something at school, they will take it home with them. And maybe the next time that they are at the supermarket with their parents, they will be saying, "Oh, don't buy that, it's full of microplastics and it's killing our oceans." So you see that it's a great way to disseminate this knowledge among families. Like I said, we work with the Tara scientific ship. We also work with Ifremer. We have partnerships with West France. So all of that means that we can bring together all the actors, all the local actors as well. So we're mostly active in local schools, those that are within a 2-hour radius around the Cité de la Mer. But I think that we are really able to really make young generations understand what is at stake.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que certains parmi vous souhaitent rebondir?
Alors, so are there any comments? questions? If not, let's move on. So now I'd like to ask a question of Ditte.
Are you on the...
Ditte, can you hear the English translation? Yes, good. All right.
So, climate change and the environment is not the only topic that is of interest to younger audiences. As a matter of fact, there is a program at your institution called Art Democrats, which is not only for young people, but by young people, as it is truly participatory. Can you tell us more about the way this program functions, and what topics emerged besides climate change when you basically turned the mic to those young people?
Yes. Sorry. I work at Copenhagen Contemporary. We are an art center who focus on contemporary art, mainly large-scale installations. We have 7,000 square meters of exhibition space. We are very much aware of our own name, Copenhagen Contemporary. Being contemporary means that we have to involve the time and the spirit of the time right now, and that means involving young people. Sitting here with you guys, I've been contemplating a little bit about the title, how to put them into action. Because I think, and also like this whole developing their skills, I think young people in general, they come with a lot to the art institution. We don't have to do anything to put them into action. They already have a lot of action in them and a lot of resources that are very inspirational for an art institution. So mainly they can put us into action, I would say. That is our experiences at Copenhagen Contemporary, where we have this project called the Art Democrats. They are a group of young people between 15 to 25, and they come voluntarily, and they are invited into our space where they provide content for our institution. They are inspired by our exhibitions, but they also come with their feelings, their own questions towards the world. So we enable them to put this out there and use us as a platform, and we facilitate their voices to be heard. And it is our experiences that creating this free space where they can provide with content, workshop, exhibitions, or just like a social community is something that enables us to be a better institution. It creates better content for us, and we learn a lot from the Art Democrats. They have created workshops where they wanted to create better sex education in schools. That was one of the topics that they chose. Of course, they're also very interested in the whole climate debate and also tolerance towards people, and in general the dialogue and the tolerance in Denmark in particular, and also in the public spaces. So they created a lot of really cool content for us. We are a young art institution. We've existed since 2016. And the average age of our guests is 35, so the Art Democrats, they fit the guest audience that we have at Copenhagen Contemporary. Another workshop that the Art Democrats did was a recipe for riot. And that can maybe sound a little bit dangerous, but our experiences is also that this confrontation with the art institution and young people and in general, or these many diverse groups of young people, this confrontational thing is really also important, because that is also what happens when you look at a work of art. It can be a fight sometimes, it can be a confrontation, but it's a good thing, because that opens up different perspectives towards the world or society in general. So for us, they put us into action and not the other way around. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jessica, before I ask you a question about recruitment of young people, which is something that often comes up, I think you have a similar experience to Ditte in your museum, and I believe that you also put into place a series of participation labs to actually find out what young people were interested in talking instead of kind of deciding for them what topic you should address with them. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I have to tell you to pause every 3 or 4 sentences so we can keep up with the translation.
The translation in English will be with a lag.
Langsam zu reden. Und danke nochmal, dass ich auch in meiner Muttersprache sprechen kann. Das ist einfach die Sprache, in der ich mich selbst am wohlsten fühle. Genau, ich glaube, wir haben mit euch ziemlich viele Überschneidungen. Wir sind, als du eben gesagt hast, Sexismus in Schulen ist ein großes Thema. Das war es bei uns auch. Und ich glaube, es war total interessant, weil wir selber nicht auf die Idee gekommen wären, dieses Thema zu setzen. Das ist nur ein Beispiel, wie wichtig es ist, Jugendlichen ernsthaft zuzuhören. Weil ich glaube, es gibt schon viele Programme für Jugendliche und man versucht Themen zu setzen, aber hört man ihnen zu, merkt man ganz schnell, dass ganz viele andere Themen aufkommen, an die man selbst vielleicht nicht gedacht hätte. Das heißt, Sexismus in Schulen ist bei uns auch ein großes Thema und das werden wir auch dieses Jahr in einem Projekt umsetzen. Genau, vielleicht ganz kurz nochmal zu uns als Museum. Sorry.
Now for the English translation. Sorry, we have to do it this way. So yes, indeed, some of the things that I have to say we've already heard from the others. I would say that one topic that emerged that was interesting was sexism at school. This is very interesting. It wasn't our idea. So it means that when you're asking young people what they think or what they would like to do, well, then you have to listen. So programs for youth, this is the question we need to ask ourselves. Are we really listening or are we just making suggestions? So it's important, I think, to actually listen to what young people are saying.
Okay, vielen Dank. Ganz kurz zu uns als Museum. Wir sind ja ein Jugendmuseum. Wir haben keine Sammlung. Wir sind eher eine Plattform, wollen eine Plattform sein für Jugendliche, gemacht von Jugendlichen. Das ist uns ganz wichtig, also weil wir, ich glaube, es gibt so eine Art von Museen nicht noch einmal in Deutschland. Es gibt viele Museen für Kinder, die sich ausschließlich an Kinder richten. Aber es gibt weniger Museen, die sich ausschließlich an ein junges Erwachsenenpublikum richten oder an Jugendliche. Und wir wollen deswegen ein Ort sein, der auch von Jugendlichen selbst gemacht wird. Ja, und wir sind eben deswegen auch sehr nah dran an den Jugendlichen. Wir arbeiten viel mit Gruppen zusammen. Wir haben Kooperationsschulen, mit denen wir einige Projekte umsetzen. Wir haben zum Beispiel ein Projekt, das heißt Discover History, Act Now. Und das ist ein Demokratieprojekt. Wir möchten mit Jugendlichen zusammen herausfinden, was Demokratie eigentlich ist. Wer ist ausgeschlossen? Wie können wir eigentlich eine Demokratie gestalten, in der sich jeder und jede gehört fühlen? Und da haben wir eine Gruppe, die ich gerne erwähnen möchte. Das sind die Critical Young Friends. Das ist eine Gruppe von 12 Jugendlichen, die bei uns im Museum mitentscheiden. Es ist eine Art Gremium, Jugendgremium, und sie entscheiden über unser Programm mit. Sie machen selbst Projekte und langfristig möchten wir, dass sie auch am Museum bleiben, um ja immer das Museum auch mitzugestalten. Um auf die Frage zurückzukommen, wie kann man sie da auch dabei behalten beim Museum? Ja.
Yes, we are a museum for young people. In fact, what's different from other museums is that we have no collection. We consider ourselves a platform for and by youth. Now, there are many museums that focus on children, but not really for young adults and adolescents. So I think in that sense, we are unique, and also we insist on co-creation. We like to work closely with schools, for example, and other youth groups. We have a project in particular, Discover History Act, working with young people to discuss what is democracy. So democracy, history, and act. What is democracy? How do we make it happen? Then we have another project, Critical Young Friends, and in this case, it's a committee of young people that work together with us to put together projects. For us, this is something that we would like to continue for the long term, is co-designing programs that are generally for and by youth. Thank you.
Okay. Man behält sie, glaube ich, oder man kann sie am Museum behalten, wenn man ihre Arbeit wertschätzt. Also wir machen viele Ausflüge zusammen. Sie erhalten auch eine Aufwandsentschädigung. Also wir wertschätzen die Arbeit auch monetär. Sie bekommen Fortbildungen zu Themen, die sie sich wünschen. Sie setzen selbst ihre Themen, machen eigene Medienprojekte und Themen, die sie gesetzt haben, drehen sich ganz häufig um Diskriminierung, um Rassismus, auch um Klimawandel. Aber es hängt natürlich auch immer mit den Jugendlichen zusammen, mit denen man zusammenarbeitet und welche Erfahrungen sie haben. Und deswegen ist Rassismus ein Riesenthema, das sie auch setzen. Und dazu machen wir dann Ausstellungen, wir machen Projekte in Schulen. Wir hatten letztes Jahr eine Ausstellung zu Demokratie. Und dort haben wir die Themen ausgestellt, die die Jugendlichen selbst erarbeitet haben.
So you asked the question, how do we keep young people coming back? Well, I think, and to participate, well, first of all, I think we need to truly value the work that they do, and in fact, even pay them in some instances and in certain ways. We also have to allow them to define what is important to them. For example, there have been special sessions on media, on discrimination, and on climate change, as you mentioned before. It's always interesting to hear from them because they do have a different angle, a different perspective on things. In the school projects that we've run, for example, on democracy, they are the ones who are really explaining what their perspective is. Thank you.
Okay, eine letzte Sache dann noch, weil es doch etwas länger dauert, tut mir leid. Bei dieser Ausstellung konnten Jugendliche, die als Besucherinnen kommen zur Ausstellung, selbst ihre Projektideen entwickeln. Und 3 dieser Ideen setzen wir dieses Jahr um mit Schulen zusammen. Also es gab eine Jury, die 3 Projekte ausgewählt hat und die werden umgesetzt. Das ist also wirklich Partizipation, wie es auch wirklich, glaube ich, sehr viel Spaß macht, auch den Jugendlichen. Und so bleiben sie auch uns erhalten noch für hoffentlich lange Zeit. Vielen Dank.
And so what about exhibits? Well, we have, it's not only made by young people, but of course we have young visitors, and they themselves are encouraged to suggest things to us, to give us their ideas. And then we put together a jury who has picked out 3 particular ideas, for example, to develop an exhibit. And young people really enjoy that as well, so that their ideas can be put into concrete action. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica. You talked about compensation, but a monetary compensation of participation in those participatory approaches. That's a very broad topic, but maybe some of our colleagues can tell us about their own practices in their institutions there. There's another topic that I noted when you were telling us about your work, and that's the topic of teams. because it's having someone who's a focal point for young people, who is the face of the museum for those young people. This is very important there. And I think there are different ways to approach the issue. Other institutions think that you rather need to have a general, a broader work of the institution there, and that you don't need to have a single focal point, but instead work with all of the people in all of the teams to work on young people's issues. This is not a question for someone in particular.
Well, at the Pompidou Center, we have various teams working with young adults across the year, in fact, and we do have a resource person, Florence Agaya, who develops these programs, who coordinates them and runs them, in fact, and we have increased our team. We do have other project managers who are more and more involved in these specific projects for youth, and so Florence and Alizé also want to ensure that these young people meet other staff members at the museum. And Ditte and Jessica mentioned this, that not only is this interesting for the young people, it's also very interesting for our own staff. So it means that there's a real dialogue, and then the young people sort of report back to us on what they think. So art session, for example, is one of those projects. And this can be on topics of programming all the way down to, well, the way that the texts are written and presented. But we get lots of feedback, in fact, from all types of visitors, for example. But, you know, when it's pertinent, useful comments, we take them into account. Well, for us, we have the pedagogical director, in fact, who works on these projects, and it's still evolving. And this person works with the teachers in primary and secondary schools who, well, we work together to decide on the different themes for the year. And so we look at the ways that we can collaborate on that. But our entire team is really mobilized. You know, if we've got 2,500 school kids coming through on a very concentrated long weekend, for example, well, it means that we are all participating, all the staff is participating in this process. And for me, you know, this is quite new, but as Ditte and Jessica were mentioning, having that youth committee is very interesting. Our approach, in fact, is, well, we tend to decide on the program and then see how people react. But it sounds very interesting to put together a youth committee. In fact, so I've certainly learned something today. That's a great idea. And I think that also getting the young people involved before the exhibit, before that would be, I think, very interesting for the type of projects that we run. I think it would be great to improve participation as well.
I wanted to share another side to our art institution. Can you hear me? Yeah. We have something that we call exhibition hosts. They're also a group of young people that we hire, so they are part of the staff, and they are in every exhibition space at Copenhagen Contemporary, and they have a dialogue with the guests. It can be a question about a specific kind of artwork, or it can be a practical issue like where is the shop or where is the exit. But we find that having that group of young people is really resourceful because they are there with their knowledge on art. Some of them study art history, some of them study performance design. They are a diverse group, but they also report back to the curatorial department, and they also say, this text, why did you write this? So this whole confrontation with their thoughts and feelings is also something that is a huge resource for us who are creating the content in the exhibition spaces. So that's also a very powerful tool to hire young people and to give them space for asking questions.
Thank you. Donc, avant qu'on laisse la parole
So, before we take questions, well, I would like to ask the four of you another question. Please tell us what you believe is the biggest challenge of working with young people in your institutions, and if you have one piece of advice. So, advice for your other colleagues. So, Jessica, why don't we start with you?
Ja, es gibt viele Herausforderungen, aber ich glaube, die größte Herausforderung ist, immer an den Jugendlichen nah dran zu bleiben, ihnen zuzuhören, da auch wirklich Energie reinzustecken, weil es ist Arbeit, natürlich in einem Jugendgremium zusammenzuarbeiten. Wir haben 3 Pädagoginnen, die nur für dieses Gremium zuständig sind. Das heißt, man braucht genügend personelle und finanzielle Ressourcen. Das ist ganz wichtig. Und das ist eine große Herausforderung. Aber da wir im Jugendmuseum arbeiten, ist das unser tägliches Brot. Genau. Okay. Ich würde abgeben, genau. Dankeschön.
So, well, I'd say our number one challenge is really trying to keep up with the young people and always listening, as I said. Now, this means work. It takes energy. In fact, we have 3 pedagogues or educational specialists who work with the youth committee. So it's resources in terms of the financing and in terms of staffing. But frankly, well, at our museum, at the Jugend's Museum, that's our day-to-day job. Thank you. So the challenge for us at Cité de la Mer is to raise awareness, and I think that's important to us, is to help contribute to an understanding of how important it is to save the oceans in order to save the planet. And, you know, working with young people, well, when you just say young people, it doesn't mean that, you know, they're not all the same. Of course, the way, you know, adults aren't all the same. But I'd say one of the real challenge is getting across really the meaning of what we do. It's not just a project for a project, but rather it all has to contribute to an overall mission.
Well, I would say some of the most challenging things, I would agree with Jessica, it's resources, because we are a limited number of people and it takes people to work with other people. So keeping that relationship with the young people is very important, and that is also a key, that they meet the same person from the institution and they create some kind of social bond there. If I had to give an advice to other institutions who are interested in working with young people, I would say that you have to work together as a whole institution. So it's not only the learning department, it's also the curatorial department, and you have to mediate to your colleagues how valuable and how important this is, because involving young people is also, they are the future audience, they are the future. So this is not something that only concerns the departments who are concerned with working with people, young people, children, and etc. It's the whole institution who should be interested in working with young people.
Well, I'd say the challenge for participatory types of project is defining perhaps a framework to try to always tie in with the mission of the establishment, but really giving the right space and a good space for the young people to be able to contribute, so that they don't feel either too limited nor without any type of framework either. It shouldn't be too vague either. And there's something that Ditte said was really wonderful about really getting the entire museum or institution on board and devoting energy to this work. It's true that all of the different departments have to be involved in this process. All right. Well, thank you to all of you. We do have time for a few questions at the back of the room. Well, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I have a question about how you keep the connection, the relationship with young audiences from childhood through adolescence, and so to hopefully get them to keep coming back to the museum. Do you have any particular good practices? This is particularly a question for
Well, I would say that you have to be very concerned with who you are addressing your content to. So you have to think of people in smaller groups, so creating a space for the babies or the toddlers, and then another space for the children, and etc. So thinking of a human being throughout life, and thinking on what they need and what kind of questions they are concerned with, both practical but also maybe philosophical. I would say you have to think about that if you have to reach them. Yeah.
Ich glaube, man muss einfach ganz eng mit ihnen zusammenarbeiten und immer im Kontakt sein. Das ist total wichtig. Sobald man den Kontakt verliert, also wir haben jetzt 3 Mitarbeiterinnen, die nur für die Gruppe des Jugendgremiums zuständig sind, und sie sind fortwährend im Kontakt über WhatsApp, über dort, wo die Jugendlichen sich bewegen, und das ist eben viel Zeit. Und deswegen braucht man wirklich Menschen, die dafür im Museum zuständig sind. Und das hat bei uns sehr gut funktioniert. Und durch die Kooperation mit Schulen, also mit ausgewählten Schulen, 3, 4, dort konkret Projekte zu machen und die Jugendlichen dort über die Lehrer anzusprechen. Das hat bei uns auch sehr gut funktioniert.
Well, as I said,
if
contact.
I can maybe add, but also not having too many.
It's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I also wanted to add that we should have expectations, but not too much expectations. So when we invite people in, there should be created this dynamic space where we can both have an idea, a framework, like Selma was talking about, but also being open to changing the framework. Yeah. So that is also very important.
Well, yes, and then it's also, yes, the question of framework is important. Some of the young people who participated in our art session project, well, they will come back because they've developed a good understanding. As Ditte has said, they have learned to have this connection at different times in their life as well. So I'm thinking of one person in particular participated in teenage years who then applied to become a mediator and is now a project manager. And so we do have a few individual examples like that. This is great. It's so satisfying to see how well that can work. But then, of course, we have this flow of visitors, of course, but we do surveys to understand to what extent people return to the museum, and we do see that we are able to build interesting connections, and people keep returning to our museum. I think there was another question. Yes, I have a question. Our young people are very connected, so I'm wondering about the usage of digital technologies and in what way that can build the ties, develop or strengthen ties with young people. Do you use that a lot?
A very good question. We also use Snapchat with the group that we have called the Thursday Club. They are in the age 9 to 14, so they use Snapchat, so we also have to use Snapchat, so yes.
We use TikTok quite a bit. Because a lot of our young people, particularly those between age 13 and 16, we know that they use it quite a bit. So we try to pay attention to this. And I think it can also be a good tool to transforming the whole visitor experience as well. So for those 13 to 16-year-olds, we do, when it makes sense, we will use different apps, or maybe we'll use virtual reality systems or things like that, but only if it has a real reason for being. For us, it's to do with the relationship, how people are greeted and made to feel welcome. This takes good human resources amongst the staff. And we know that young people like to participate in very manual, serigraphy, sculpting, things like that. And I was speaking with Ditte yesterday, and we know that young people enjoy the hands-on experience. So if they, yes, okay, young people like to do things with digital technologies, but what we've seen in our workshops is they really like to do things with their hands as well. All right. Well, then thank all of you for participating in the round table. I'm sorry the time was so short. I'd say perhaps two of the key lessons that have emerged is the ideas that there's a real dialogue to be developed with the young people, and that everyone learns and wins from this type of a sharing experience and a very active experience, be it in the museums, in art, but also in society. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.